This is the brand new F1 arcade in Boston Seaport. Ever since I heard the news that this was coming to Boston, I've been incredibly excited. So I had to go to opening day to check it out. I didn't really know what to expect when going inside, but upon walking into the arcade, you're met with an impressive scene. There are 69 full cockpit racing simulators scattered throughout the space, with 2 huge curved monitors at each one. Looking around more, you see a very cool bar, along with seating scattered between the racing sims. In this main room, there are probably about 20 simulators. If you continue straight through, you'll reach the briefing room. I'm not really sure why it's called that, but yeah, it's called the briefing room. Inside the briefing room is yet another smaller bar and at least 10 more simulators, and of course more seating for guests that are eating or drinking. To the right of this room is another, smaller room for more simulators. Once back through the main room, you'll find another wall of simulators, as well as a smaller cut-off section with, you guessed it, more simulators. Throughout the space there are lots of cool details that add to the F1 vibe. Like I said before, I didn't really know what to expect when entering, but this was definitely above my expectations. There was plenty of room to be walking around or socializing, as well as a good amount of seating for people not currently racing. The way the simulators were set up was great in my opinion. The way that they're sectioned off means that your friends can gather around to watch you, as opposed to just having like 3 walls with 20 simulators in a row. It's definitely designed to have more of a flow so people can eat, drink, race, and talk to friends. It's definitely a welcoming environment. Now, I want to get into the pricing details before we get into the racing sims themselves, because trust me, I'm going to ramble in a review of the simulators. If you want to spend a night at the F1 arcade, you have to book a slot ahead of time. This time slot is for 2 to 17 people, which is obviously a huge range. The time slots are every 15 minutes and they include 3 head-to-head races. The pricing for each time slot is $20 per person, which is honestly not too expensive. Each of these is about an 8-minute race, so it's not by lap. When the timer runs out on the race, that's that, you don't get to finish your lap. Then it moves on to the next track. In these head-to-head races, you can race against other people in your party on the same track, which is definitely a really cool addition. We'll get more into this in a second. As for the food and drinks, I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting it to be insanely expensive. But to be honest, it really wasn't that bad. I was with 2 friends and we each got 2 rounds of drinks that each came out to be $25 before tip. These included a beer, a bourbon, and a seltzer. As for food, the menu was pretty extensive. We didn't get any, but there were really good options from what I saw. The prices for food also weren't too bad. It was definitely lower than what I was expecting. I can't speak on the quality of food given we didn't order any, but the stuff I saw other people eating looked great. Overall, pricing isn't really too bad. To do a package of 3 races with a friend and to get 2 drinks each would cost you around $40 each. Obviously this could be a little bit more or less depending on the drinks, and to add food would be another average of around $20. For a night out with a unique activity, 2 drinks and some food, $60 each really isn't that bad. But alright, now let's get into the good part, the simulators themselves. The first thing I notice about each simulator is obviously how each one has its own cockpit, with 2 widescreen curved monitors mounted to each one. The bottom one displays your view for the race, and the top one displays a sort of live broadcast view so your friends can watch the race. Upon sitting down in the cockpit, you have to scan a QR code to set up your profile, including your driver name, which appears to not have any sensors on it, so that's cool. Once you set up your profile, you can choose a difficulty. This gives you 5 options, ranging from easy to elite mode. These options give you a range of AI difficulty, automatic versus manual gears, the racing line on or off, and the amount of assists on the car. So no ABS, traction control, etc. Obviously I had to choose elite mode, so that means I had no assists, no racing line to follow, and the highest AI difficulty. The hardware itself was honestly pretty impressive. Each simulator has a Moza GS wheel with active shift lights and of course paddle shifters. Unfortunately, there are only a few buttons you can use, but they give you access to a rear view mirror and a change in camera angle. As for the pedals, each simulator has Hosingfeld pedals, which were honestly fantastic. The gas pedal has a spring for resistance and the brakes are loadcell, meaning they feel much more realistic. They're calibrated perfectly as well, with the brake not being super hard to press, but not too soft either. I've never used these pedals before, but I definitely want to buy some after this experience. Lastly, the most impressive hardware in each simulator is the fact that they're all motion rigs. I had literally no idea this is going to be a thing, so I was very happy when I found out. The range of motion on these isn't crazy, but it's so immersive. Under braking, you lurch forward, cornering puts the cockpit on an angle, and accelerating pushes you back into the seat. This was honestly such a cool and immersive experience, and made it a whole lot more fun. Each cockpit also has speakers in the headrest right behind you, so you're able to hear the game audio over the loud music in the space itself. Once the first race is set to start, you're assigned a random track and a random car. From what I could tell, each car has balanced performance, so it doesn't really matter which car you get. The Haas will be just as fast as the Red Bull. It was a bit of a bummer that you couldn't select the track, as I would definitely prefer to drive on some of my favorites. You're placed on the grid in a random position, so it could be pole position or dead last. You'll see the start lights come on and a prompt telling you not to jump the start, then it's lights out. One thing to note about the driving is that you aren't actually racing on the F123 franchised game. I believe it's a modded version of R Factor 2, so if you're expecting the F1 game like I was, you'll be a bit surprised. The mechanics themselves are honestly a bit weird. There's very low force feedback in the wheel, which really threw me off at first. If you're watching this and don't know what that means, basically the steering wheel is super light and easy to turn. Therefore, it's not as easy to feel the bumps on the track or tension when taking a corner. However, this lack of force feedback is slightly made up for by the motion rig in the cockpit, so not all is lost. The paddle shifters on the wheel were super satisfying to use. As for the pedals, again, they were fantastic. They had a great balance in terms of calibration and definitely added to the immersion. One thing I noticed is the positioning is a little bit weird. Since you can only slide the seat forward or backwards and the wheel and pedals are in a fixed position, I ended up with my arms at the perfect length for the wheel, but my feet a little too close to the pedals. I'm also 6'4", so I wasn't really expecting to be a perfect fit in the chair. The game itself also had some pros and cons. Even with all the assists off on Elite mode, I felt like the car was pretty much glued to the track. I didn't spin or have any oversteer, and I could be unrealistically aggressive with the throttle. It was definitely a little bit easier than I thought it would be. On top of this, the alleged hardest AI difficulty was incredibly easy. With a good start, every race I had at least a 6-second gap to the car behind after the first lap. I actually stopped a few times throughout each race to let the cars catch up to me so the racing would be a little bit more interesting. I know that sounds braggy, but I really don't mean it to. I have a simulator at home, so obviously I'm used to driving. If I had no experience on a simulator, I would definitely not be able to do Elite mode and would probably stick to the more casual ones. However, there's also a lot of pros. The motion rig is obviously incredibly fun to experience, and the racing itself is set up really nicely. There's enough time on each race to do about 4 or 5 laps depending on the track, so you have plenty of time to gather track knowledge and get used to driving. My first race was at Suzuka, my second at Zandvoort, and my third at Monza. The track selection is generally balanced, as most of the tracks are pretty beginner friendly. The speakers and the headrest also make the experience better, as you can very clearly hear the game audio but still talk to your friends. The hardware itself was also really top-notch stuff, and the dual monitor setup on the rig itself was a nice touch. Overall, the racing experience was awesome. Yeah, the AI was a little bit slow, but it was one of the most immersive sim racing experiences I've ever had. The motion rig on the cockpit was easily the highlight of the experience. It was so immersive and incredibly cool to have the cockpit moving with me as I drove. It's honestly hard to describe how cool it is. I know this video is going to reach a ton of people that have never touched a sim racing setup, and also some people like me that use one every day. What I can say is the F1 Arcade experience in Boston is a ton of fun, even for someone like me who's used to using this type of hardware. The pricing is honestly not bad, and the environment is relaxed and very cool, and the racing itself is super immersive and really a lot of fun. If you're considering making a reservation at the F1 Arcade, definitely do it, it's well worth it.